Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Honest Youth Pastor YouTube channel, the channel that helps believers use biblical discernment in all aspects of life. Tonight, we are going to be looking at another tweet, specifically a tweet that I put up that I did not think was controversial, but apparently was. But tonight, as always, I have the Matt and Josh on with me here, and we are going to discuss this. Now, before anybody says anything about the fact that we're all dudes and there's no female representation on here, let me just say it from the beginning. I asked a couple people, okay? They didn't have time. It was short notice on my part. I'm sorry. So if you want any representation from the ladies, I guess if you're a lady in here, you can comment in the comment section. So anyway, I just want to nip that in the bud right away. Okay, right away. So in case you have no idea what I'm talking about, let's jump over real quick. As always, looking at the tweet that apparently just rattled the world of some people. Now, some background, guys. I didn't even tell you this before I jumped on. This was literally tweeted out as I was passing out to go to sleep on the 2nd. I wasn't even. I was just like, "Hey, this sounds interesting. This is some advice that I would want." And before I dozed off, this is what I put out. Right? I said, "My advice: be a student of Scripture. Get married young. Be active in your local church. Be a hard and reliable worker, and evangelize often." Now, as we all know by the title of this video, one of those things very much set some people off. The quote tweets, if you want to go look on the quote tweets, there's some good laughs there. There are some very good laughs if you want to go there. But anyway, you can go over there, check that on Twitter. That's the tweet that apparently broke some people's brains. The evangelize often also kind of got a little hate, but the married young got the most. So tonight, what we're going to talk about, we're going to be going through, there were 3 major things. So I'm going to throw these out, and then we'll kind of cover them one by one in our little round table, as we always do. The major thing, the question that was above all other questions on this tweet was, how young are you talking about? Because you say you get married young, and young can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. There was even somebody that I can tell is just the life of every party that was like, well, these Bible thumpers probably mean 12. So that's a reasonable individual to engage in conversation with. But so the question was, though, how young is too young? Now, I'm going to throw this out before I pass it over to, we'll go Matt and then Josh, because we always go to Josh first. So we'll go Matt, then Josh. But before, just to clear the air here, I didn't even have an age in my head when I tweeted that. But as I've had to think about it, I'm going probably 18 to 23. I know somebody that got married when they were 17. They're still married, got a lot of kids. But the idea is I would say that age range, right? You're going like 17, 18, and 17 is going to bug a lot of people, but I know of people that have done that. And then so all the way up to May, I think 23 is really on the edge of young if you're going that as far as what I'm talking about. So if I have to be held against the wall and say, hey, what do you mean by young? That's what I'm talking about by getting married young. So let's go to Matt first. What do you think, first of all, I guess, is when somebody says, hey, actually, let me back up a minute. First, I'm going to ask you guys, do you even agree with that? Because you may not. This isn't your tweet. This is the things that come out of my brain. So first of all, do you agree with the idea of getting married young? And if so, what would that category be?
So, yeah, I guess I'm going to have to go with the position that it would really depend on what the situation is. And I think that our contextual and cultural and societal situation has transformed in some ways for the better, in some ways for the worse, over the last over the last century. And it seems like with each passing decade and sometimes each passing year, those changes begin to speed up faster. So I know that the definition of getting married young to, let's say, even our grandparents or great grandparents would be radically different than what we would classify today. And I'm just thinking about both sets of my great grandparents would essentially be what we would classify now legally as pedophiles. And yet, but I'm here.
Well,
So
this live stream just got demonetized, everyone.
you can edit it out if you have to. But I mean, I'm just being truthful. So it's totally different. Whereas now in our current, at least in American culture, we have the legal age of marriage at 18 years old for very good reasons. And I think that if I were to give the ideal age of just um just anyone getting married without any kind of nuance for specific contexts and personal situations, I think around the age of 24. I have lots of friends who got married right out of high school when they're like 18, 19 years old. Um, and so a lot of the most of them are still together and have happily married lives. But I think that probably a good age range that I would recommend would be like maybe a recommended minimum of 20 all the way up till around 28. So those 8 years, those sort of like maybe 4 to 5 years on both sides of 24. And I just say that because I look back at myself now being 31, over the course of my 20s, and I think that it definitely, for me, it probably wasn't even till after 24 that I really began to mature into the person that I am today, and maybe in some ways immatured into the person that I am today. But yeah, I think the 5 years on either side of 24.
Gotcha. Well, and one thing I think before we jump over to you, Josh, that is important there is what you said as far as context. So one of the things I failed to mention that we talked about before I pushed live is that this tweet, and I think it's already sort of implicit in the tweet, but this was meant for believers, right? So this idea of what I'm assuming here, all right, and I make a lot of assumptions, which is going to probably aren't obviously worked out within the tweet, but the assumption here is that these individuals that get married young have a structure around them that are able to help them when they have troubles. They have people Titus 2 sort of situations that they can go to, that they can look up to, that they can have get advice from. And like you said, culturally, a lot of people just don't have that, which is why for some people and we'll get to that I guess here as we kind of go around. Some of the people that did DM were like, it was the most terrible idea in the world. I had no support. I wasn't even fully myself yet, yada, yada, yada. Sort of the kind of what you were saying there. And I think part of the thing we've shifted culturally is that we don't have the same sort of support systems that maybe our parents or grandparents had built in. And therefore it does make it a bit more difficult. But when you have those, and I'm just speaking again to my experience, when you have, like, I got married at 21. So whenever you have those people around you, that support system to where you can go, I don't know how to deal with this lady because she's getting on my nerves, or whenever I've got on my wife's nerves, that she had somebody that you could go to and be like, hey, how you deal with this knucklehead? Oh, okay. And you just, be able to say, go talk it out, go talk, you have that support system. And I think that maybe is a little bit of what people, they just don't have that anymore. So this idea of I have to, and I guess we'll probably get into this a bit more in a little bit too, but I have to develop into who I am and even know who I am before I can do this, because those structures that used to be there kind of aren't there anymore. So anyway, Josh, what are your thoughts on this as far as agree, disagree, age range?
I think in general, I would agree with it. I agree with what Matt said, that there's context involved, and that could be specific to the people also in terms of where they're at in life, their maturity. Are they able to take care of themselves? And there are people that are 25 years old and above that can't take care of themselves, and it might not be a good idea to get married. So I know for myself, I got married when I was 24. I would have gotten married earlier, but I got deployed to Iraq. We decided to wait for after that. So I would have fallen into that earlier category if that hadn't happened. So I was engaged, for that year and a half. So that's why I didn't get married until I was 24. Then thinking in terms of people that I know who got married young, it's probably a mixed bag between people that are still married and have been married for 20 plus years and those that are divorced. And the divorces happened at all ranges of years, be it a handful of years to 16 plus years. The couples broke up. So, in terms of an age range for myself, I tend to think that graduating college is probably pretty good. That's 22, and I know that's going to sound young to a lot of people, but I think at that point in time, if you've graduated college and you're entering into a career or a job, I don't see any issue to wait or to do it then. I don't see any reason to wait. So I know there's lots to talk about in terms of that. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But just to answer it, I generally agree with it, and I would say that I would say 22 to 25 is good, with caveats, of course. I mean, I think there's always going to be that. It's such a subjective thing in terms of the people themselves. I don't think you can just have a hard and fast rule. Well, here's your diploma. You'll be married in 3 months. Everyone will attend, and then X number of years thereafter, you should have kids, and so on and so forth. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think on that, and we didn't really talk that we were going to go this direction, but hearing what kind of is being said, and I'll ask you guys this here in a minute, but so all the people, like, I refuse to perform any marriage ceremonies unless I do marriage counseling with the couples, right? Because what I want to do is make sure that you, like you were saying, as far as contextually, are you there?
Right.
So we go through a myriad of different things. So, I mean, obviously, the oldest couple I think that I performed a ceremony for was probably in their mid 40s. And the youngest couple was in their 20s.
Sure.
Young 20. I mean, they were barely 20. And really working through, especially with those guys, like, all right, do you know what this means for you? Like you two are coming together as one. Like there's going to be people that push back on this. I don't really care. You can push back if you want. I know there's a lot of nuance here. There's the caveat. When I sit down with these couples to do it, I mean, right away I pick their brain. Like, do you think there's an out for you in this? Like, is there an out? Does divorce on the table for you? And just talking through that to see if they've even thought about that. What are the implications for that? What their plan is. I sit down and I talk. I mean, again, I want to pitch. I'm kind of prefacing this because I'm going to pitch it to you guys and kind of see what that marriage counseling looked like for you guys, because ours, to be quite frank, and I love the dude that married us, I do, but the marriage counseling that I got, the reason I do as in-depth as I do is because I did not get that in-depthness. So I was like, I am not going to do that. I'm going to do something a lot more in-depth. So it's 3 hours, 3 nights, an hour each, sitting down and going through. I got a whole packet. Like, I am the dude that you don't want because I am going to make you go through some stuff. But my intention is if you haven't fought, you're going to fight. Like, that's you need to do this. So... but the idea here is to sit people down. I think maybe that's where some people kind of get married. There's nobody there that's sort of guarding the gate to say, are you ready for this? Do you understand what this means from a Christian perspective? And what you're entering into here and what that means for you as the man and you as the woman. And again, people are going to be mad about that. But I mean, we go through that stuff with them and, talk to him. So how big of a thing? I've already explained kind of my not so marriage counseling that I got. What was that like for you when you guys got married? Do you think
it was? No, go ahead. What were you saying?
I was just saying. I mean, do you think that it was good or bad? And do you think that if it was really good, that it prepped you well, or if it was bad, you could have used more prep? Like if it would have been better.
So I would say it was good. So we already had a relationship with a pastor that did it. So here's some context for you. So I got home from Iraq in June of 2006, and I was married in September of 2006. So it was a very short time frame for me in terms of coming home from that and then getting married. So that's its own basket of would you marry? Hey honey, here I am. I had my own set of issues. But outside of that, so we were attending a good church and we were friends with the pastor. And so he had set up time to do our premarital counseling. He suffered from migraines terribly though. And so each week, he would cancel like, I have this terrible migraine. I can't do it until finally I was like, hey, Colin, we're getting married in like 2 weeks, man. So he's like, all right,
you're going to do this or no?
Tuesday or Thursday. He's like, come over, no matter what, even if I have a migraine, we're gonna hammer it out. And we went over to his house for like a 4-hour marathon session. He had like 10 things that he likes to cover, kind of like what you just said, like maybe not the exact same, but just here's the broad topics that he wants to cover. And it's ranging from, what are your parents' marriages like, finances, do you know what sex is? Because that's a topic you do have to cover with Baptists, because not all of them do. That's another podcast, though.
That's mind blowing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Grown adults that don't know what it is. It's not good. It's really bad. So, anyways, so we did that, and it was very valuable for us. And a part of that, it wasn't just that it was good for Janelle and I. It was really good because then we had a connection with our pastor, because he had counseled us in this, right? And he knew a little bit more. He actually grew up with my dad. So there was kind of some old family history there in terms of him knowing who I was. But it was good that he knew who Janelle and I were. And then the assumptions, things that we take for granted in all of this, are that in our church, there were probably 15 young married couples. And so we were all really close, and we were all really tight, and we got together frequently in each other's homes and doing all sorts of stuff before we had kids. And so that community really fostered itself to help all of those marriages grow. And so, it's easy for me to say, oh, yeah, I think you should get married young, because in my context, having that support system, having that counseling up front, both of us entering into it knowing and viewing it as a covenant until we're dead, no outs, that all lends itself to the decision-making process to be like, yeah, we know what we're getting ourselves into, and we're going to go and do that. And so, yeah, not everyone may have that counseling opportunity. Not everyone may have that kind of community to help the roots grow of that young marriage. All those things kind of play into it, and they feed into my own bias of saying, yeah, I get married young, but those are my assumptions too, right? Those are the things you take for granted.
Yeah. So I want to shoot it over to you, Matt, because I don't know, who's watching knows through your background, but your experience is a little bit different than that. So with that, if you want to kind of lead into the counseling thing, and then was it good? Was it bad? Do you think it would have made any difference either way in regards to that?
Oh yeah, I was an extremely stupid 20-year-old. My parents begged me not to get married, and I did anyways. And so, I was, I guess you could say, in a state of rebellion, and I definitely reaped what I sowed, because I got married young, got married at 20, was married for 3 years, and was actually in the process of going through an ordination program. And I came home one day from one of those classes, and she was gone, and just left a note just saying, I can't do this anymore. Don't love you. This is goodbye. And so that was an extremely difficult time in my life, because of handling a quickly broken marriage, a lot of expectations and intentions being totally derailed at that point. And so I guess that those scars and that broken road behind me is testimony in itself to the importance of really taking wise counsel to heart, and not being stubborn, and making decisions irregardless of the consequences. But most important of all, no, never mind. I'm not going to go there. Never mind. I was going to make a joke, but not the proper place. Okay. But yeah, so that's my experience. That's what happens when you do dive into these things without appropriate counsel, without the right kind of support and blessings, etc., etc.
Gotcha. Now, I might have just so you guys, did you have marriage counseling at all, or no? None whatsoever.
No.
No. Okay. Okay. So that's one of the things. I think that's a good segue sort of into this next sort of topic that came up that kept coming in the DM. So one of the things that I think we've kind of established is, one, it's really important for, as far as getting married young, I think is good in regards to it really sets you up. I want to kind of, maybe I'll tack it on the end if we don't get to it in the conversation. There's something I really want to say about just I think the benefit of that. But within that, if you do, obviously wise counsel, a good church around you, all of that. But then that brings up the question of, what if I don't have a good church around me? What if I don't have, support systems around me? What if I don't even have, I can't even find anybody? Because that was the second thing that came up. It was just like, all right, great. I'd love to get married in my when I'm younger, but that time's kind of already passed and I still can't find anybody. So what do I do then in that situation? And before we kind of go around and sort of talk about that, one of the things that I think is important, like the statement that I was making, get married young, if that is a thing that is possible for you, I think that is ideal. If it's not in the cards currently, if the cards have already been on the table and you're on to the next stage of your life, I think the best thing, and I guess I'll lead off the conversation to kind of see where you guys want to, your opinions on this. I think the next stage is just saying, okay, Lord, I'm just going to be faithful where I'm at. And as I'm being faithful where you've put me, the ideally here, again, this is a conversation for believers. I don't want, if you're not a believer, you don't believe in Jesus, this conversation is not for you. But if you are a believer, as you're in this stage, I think, and this is the advice I've had to give a couple of guys that I know that, are at church or at work that are believers, is that, also, if my camera goes out, just ignore it. It's going to happen. So as believers, though, just grow in the Lord, serve at your local church, do the other things on the list, guys. And then as you do the other things on the list, hopefully there is going to be a young lady or a young man that come into your life that relationship can grow. But I think sometimes, and I hear this all the time from people, anytime I post anything relationship wise, is that singles are singled out in the church as, oh, you failed. And I don't want that to come off in the tweet as, oh, well, if you don't get married young, boat's already sailed for you. You're not a good Christian. So I think let's talk about that a little bit, because that does seem to be one of the things that seems to be prevalent. I don't see it in my church, but apparently in Christian culture, it seems to be a thing. But in my church, there's not a lot of single people. I live in a rural area. Almost everybody's married. That's just the thing. If you're not, honestly, I can't think of one single person that isn't dating someone, at least right now. Sure. So like, where do you think that stigma comes from? And two, what can we do maybe in your head about it to do better at that? So who wants to go first? Matt, Josh, what do you think?
I'll go first. I don't know where the stigma comes from. I think it exists as a stigma. I don't think it's as prevalent as we would necessarily think, though. I know it's popular in the meme world, right? All the singles memes and how churches treat people. And we have to be really careful. I mean, memes exist because stereotypes exist and they're real, and there's truth behind stereotypes, whether we want to admit that or not, right? That's why they're funny, because we can relate to it. So there are single people, or there are married people who used to be single, that can relate to that kind of feeling of being insufficient or having failed because you haven't married. And I think a part of that, it's the Christian experience is, you look in the Bible, right? As you progress through life, there are stages in life, particularly in religious life, that begin, there's birth, and then there's kind of that puberty where you reach adulthood stage, then there's marriage, and then there's death. Those are kind of the four markers of religious life. And that's universal across all religions, whether it's Christianity or anything else. And so if those are the four markers, and you reach puberty and then die, you missed that third marker in there. And so that could be looked at as a deficiency, potentially. Maybe not on purpose, maybe not overtly, right? But certainly it could be implied, and people might feel that way. So that's probably part of where that stigma comes from. I think what's happened, though, is, let's assume that a stigma exists. There's also been this push against that to say that, well, singleness is better than being married. And you start this argument over, well, should we be single? Should we be married? Right? Everybody wants to go to 1 Corinthians 7 and take their take on it.
That came
Each
up in a few DMs. Yeah, yeah.
Right, right. And so it's one of those things where we've translated, we've kind of swung against this, where it's like, well, I'm in a season of singleness, and singleness is better. And it's like, well, it can be, right? I mean, Paul allowed for that, but there was also specific circumstances and provisions that went along with that as well. So this is one of those things where there are so many moving pieces. It's hard to nail it down to say that it's just this one reason or the other. There's so many things, right? It could be, there's not enough people to date, and it's all everything you just listed out, right? What if you can't find a church? There is no church. There is no support structure. There's literally no one to date, right? But it could also be that there are people to date, but your standards are out of whack, right? Or you have some unrealistic standard of who you want to marry. You might have a perfectionist idea that you have to have achieved some state in life or maturity or a corporate progression or whatever before you can get married. And these are all things that you have to kind of take in stride and decide, like, well, do I really need to be making X dollars a year to get married? And this might, maybe I'm contradicting myself with what I said earlier about, being able to take care of yourself financially as being one of the markers to get married. But that's not, I don't think that's a hard and fast rule. There's actually a comment in here of the guy that said that, he got married young and they were broke, the first few years of their marriage. That was true of me. I mean, we didn't have any money when we were first married.
Wait, hold on. There's a stage where you get out of broke? There's a stage where that happens?
I've heard.
Yeah, it's called singleness.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
Oh, that was good. Oh, perfect. Oh, man. So, I don't know.
Sorry, I broke your train of thought. I'm sorry, yeah.
No,
that's good. That's good. I was pretty much done rambling at that point anyway. So I don't know if I really answered the question or not. Some of the things that are, I'm kind of thinking of too are, I guess we're talking about the objections to getting married young. I also want to, maybe if we have time, talk about, the goals of marriage. Like, what's the point of getting married in the first place? And I would contend that one of those goals is having children. Most people that get married want to have kids. Maybe if you don't, no big deal. But if you do want to have kids, there's a line where you can't anymore. There's also a line where you're going to have kids, and then you're going to do the math and realize you're going to have kids into your 60s. And it's at that point you will wish you'd been married younger. Not that I know from experience.
All right. So, Matt, what do you, I think that's a good plate we'll pivot to after kind of Matt speaks on the singleness issue and like sort of maybe the stigma if he sees any in the church as well. And then we can sort of pivot to that. Cause I think that plays into the point that I want to make at some point in this discussion as well. So Matt, you want to touch on that maybe as a single man, the stigma, if you've seen it, all that. I mean, cause I'm talking, I don't even know cause I'm not. So.
Right.
Yeah, I think that there is this stigma in certain places that if you are a Christian and you are a certain age, even at a young age, and you're not with someone, you're not married, that there is something that's that's wrong with you. I know even my grandparents are sort of some of those people. This is a couple of years ago, but there was one point where my grandmother looked at me point blank, very seriously, and she said, "Matthew, are you gay?" And I said, "No, I'm not gay," because she was like, she couldn't understand why I wasn't already why I wasn't with someone or dating, and she was like,
"So that must be a grandma
concerned.
thing," because my brother got asked that by our grandma too. He's like, "No, I just can't find a girl, grandma. It's not that." Yeah, the exact same question. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is that, and it's really weird because in the early centuries and even probably throughout the first entire millennium of Christianity, virginity specifically, but singleness period, including divorcees and widows, widowers, were seen as the ideal state, that if you were able to remain a virgin. If you did not get married, there was considered this inner holiness that came from that. Now, of course, that developed into an unhealthy approach to marriage, and we even see that in the present day with. Uh, Sexual scandals in different churches that are one way or another, in certain cases, connected to that kind of mentality and maybe a life that has sort of been forced on someone. But for much longer than it has been the other way, the church has actually valued singleness over marriage. Now, my approach to it is that I think that they are both equally valid. In just my opinion, that for those who are equipped and called or are required to remain single for whatever that reason may be, that state as a Christian is equally valid to marriage. However, that is not to say that 50% of Christians should be married and the other half needs to be unmarried. It's actually an extremely small percentage of people who are either called, equipped, choose, or are forced into a state of singleness or perpetual virginity, if you want to, if that even still exists in our culture. I don't think so. I highly doubt that. But you look at what even Jesus said in Matthew 19. He's teaching about divorce, and the disciples are probably all looking at Peter because he may or may not have been the only disciple who was married at that point, and they're like, "Oh Lord, if it's that way between a man and a woman, it'd be better not to marry at all." And then Jesus responds, and he says, "Well, this is not for everyone, only to those who it has been given." And then he launches into the whole idea of eunuchs and such. And so Jesus affirms that life of singlehood, but it's also affirming in an extreme minority. It's the same way in 1 Corinthians 7. Paul is still affirming an extreme minority. He says, "I wish that everyone was like me, but I know not, because everyone has their own gifts, everyone has their own temptation." And it's really funny. You can kind of tell that Paul is a little bit bitter against marriage for whatever that reason may be, because the concession, the stipulation that he gives for why you should marry rather than being single is essentially, if you can't keep your pants on. And he says, if you can't control yourself, get married. If you can control yourself, don't get married. But I think Paul knew, and it was a concession, that the vast majority, maybe even 99.9% of people cannot control themselves, and so therefore you need to get married.
I think that's a lovely connection that you made. Most of y'all can't keep your pants on, so go ahead and get married so you're good. Yeah. So so I think one of the things before we kind of pivot into the next sort of point there is sort of what you said there. I think that ties into the whole conversation I hear sometimes about marriage being sort of this idol in the church, like, oh, you have to do this. And this is the kind of the epitome of being a Christian, is to get married and have the babies and all of that, which again, I think is the opposite side of what you said as far as the unhealthy direction singleness can go. Also, it can go unhealthy the other way, which is, hey, you're not married, so there's obviously something wrong with you. But now I'm going to be thinking about Paul in that line going, hey, you can't keep your pants on, so you should get married. So talking about those of us that can't keep our pants on, so we got married. Going into marriage, what was the exact thing you said you want to cover? The benefits? Is that what you said, Josh? The sort of the benefits of getting...
the goals.
The goals,
like, why do you want to get married in the first place? And I mean, obviously that does come up, right? And that's kind of a recurring meme. It's this idea of, oh, well, I struggle with sexual sin and marriage will solve all of that.
Oh, yeah.
The obvious answer is, of course not. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But it also happens to be the only biblically ordained outlet for sexual satisfaction at the same time. And so we don't base our theology on the meme, which is more or less correct.
Please don't base your theology on a meme.
Right. So, but at the same time, we have to acknowledge that this is how God has ordained that to occur. And so if, 99% of the people, like Matt said, struggle with that, this is the God ordained way to help fight that. Now, obviously, there are men and women that are married that struggle with fidelity and pornography and all sorts of sexual sin. But that doesn't negate the fact that this is the biblically ordained way to engage in sexual activity between a man and a woman. So that could be a goal of marriage. I don't think it should be the primary goal. I don't think you should go get married just because you want to have sex. That would be kind of a meme and would be meme worthy.
Well, yeah, that's just going to lead you to a lot of. I mean, there are couples that how do I say? There are couples that have had lots of trouble that I know because of that right there. We got married, so this doesn't happen, and that doesn't solve it, and that just causes all sorts of other issues that occur. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Which I think again is where good biblical marriage counseling comes into play before that even get that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So the other thought I had, was children, and wanting to have children. And that's something that you do kind of have to think about. So we just had our third child. It will probably be our last, Hannah. So she's 2.5. My wife was 36 when she had her. And now I made fun of her for this all the time. But, on her paperwork at that point, it was a geriatric pregnancy. So, all her paperwork, had geriatric all over it. She's only 36. But as you get to those more advanced maternal years, having a child can become more and more of a health risk. It's not unheard of, right? I know people that are, had children at 40 and 41, but they were always a high risk pregnancy. There's always all sorts of extenuating circumstances with it, and now they have to raise this child, and it's going to be a blessing. It's not a terrible thing, but you do have to consider having a child in your old age. What does that look like in America today? How do you care for this child? Will you be able to care for this child when you're in your 60s? What's your health going to be like? How do you relate to a high schooler at that point and raise them in the admonition of the Lord and be able to relate and understand what they're going through, right? I'm 40 and I have a hard time relating to 15-year-olds on TikTok. What does that look like when it's your own kid and you've got that kind of an age gap? That's something to consider. And if that's a goal of yours, that's something to really be thinking about. You might not want to wait too long. Again, if you can help it, all the caveats earlier, assuming there's a viable person who loves the Lord, all of those things.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where, the point I really want to make sure that I make here, when I talk about, hey, get married young if you can, the reason being is because, again, I know there's the DMs are full of stories of oh, this was the most horrible thing that happened, or this was the best thing. And this is all, I'm obviously coming at it from an experiential point of view here, but Matt said he was a dumb kid. I had no business. I was like, oh, I'm married. Okay, cool. I got a job and a car, and I guess I have to pay bills now. And I'm 38, so I don't even feel like I was an adult until probably 30. I was thinking back, and my daughter was probably 6 before I was like, oh, I'm an adult. Oh wow. I've had a job for a long time and a kid for a long time, and this is important. But with that being said, I've talked to a lot of people and they're like, hey, I've got to get a job down. I've got to know myself. I've got to be mature. I've got to love myself. All of those things. And when I look back, and me and my wife were talking about this because of this tweet exploding, and we wouldn't trade for the world the fact that we have matured together. And that we grew up together, essentially. It's sort of crazy to say that, but we did. We were 20 and 21 when we got married. So it's kind of looking back being like, wow, we had to figure out how to pay bills. Like, it was just kind of like, and they were like, oh no, you two are totally responsible by yourself. Go for it, whatever. And, you know, growing up, learning about each other, learning about ourselves in that process. And my wife had a really good analogy for it. I guess she saw it somewhere on the internet. I can't remember exactly where she said she saw it, but there's like an arborist, but he's an artist. So long story short, he takes two baby saplings, and then the whole point is he grows them together intertwined, because when they grow together, they're now strong together, but he can't do that with two grown trees. And the idea being this picture of like these trees growing together, dependent on one another, supporting one another. And she said that like that's kind of what getting married young looks like, is this idea of like, hey, yeah, you guys these trees are totally capable of growing separately. They have everything they need to do that, but growing together, they're actually sturdier. They support one another. They live longer. And it's one of those things. I mean, they actually mold together. The whole thing. I mean, eventually they just grow together. And I think that's a really, I mean, I get that there are bad experiences people have had, but I'd say that if we look back at those, not that like good marriage counseling is necessarily going to prevent bad experiences, but it's going to help a lot. Not that a strong church is going to prevent bad marriage experiences, because there's been people in our church. I feel like the church I go to is a really strong church, and there's been people there that have had a lot of marriage difficulty, but that wasn't because the church wasn't there to support them. That's because bad decisions were being made. And I think when you have these things, you're never going to have the perfect scenario. I mean, when me and my wife first got married, we had to go find a church somewhere. We were not financially stable. We both worked at Walmart. I mean, yeah, that wasn't going to get us anywhere. And we were both in college. So it's one of those things that I think that if you're like, oh, these things have to line up before I can do this, I think you're chasing a dream that's just not going to give you what you think it is. And if you submit yourself, and this is where I'm talking to believers here. Like, if you submit yourself to the biblical mandate of what a marriage looks like, both of you have to do this clearly. But when you do that, guys, like I 100% would say get married when you're young, as long as you are saying, hey, I'm going to do this thing. I'm committed to this. And that's why, man, I pound it into their heads when we do this marriage counseling. Like, you two aren't two. You're one. Like, this is not how, and then this is how, and again, I always caveat it with, hey, I know you may not agree with this, but this is how it looks like to work in a marriage. Dude, you are sacrificing, you are leading, you are loving, you are coming alongside, you are supporting, you are submitting. I know everybody hates that. I don't care. That's what we cover. And the idea is saying, like, if you work within this structure well, caring for one another, loving one another, submitting yourself to a biblical community, it's not going to prevent bad times. It's going to make sure, though, you can get through those bad times. And by the time you get, I mean, like, again, I'm 38. By the time I'm this far along in my marriage, you can, I don't think I said this before we went live, but I'll say it again. Like, if my wife dies, like, I'm done, guys. Like, I don't want to try this again. Like, that was my one and done. And there's nobody that knows me better than her. And I know her really well. I'm not going to say I don't know her the best, but like, I know her really well. And that comes from growing together and growing. So again, I'm not saying like, put yourself in a situation that's terrible, but if you have the opportunity to do that and you're willing to submit yourself to biblical principles, there's just, in my opinion, like, there's not a better way to set yourself up for success, for sanctification, for a very, very blessed life than to do that. And it's not going to be perfect, and it's not going to be lovely, and you're going to fight a little bit. But that's the process of growing and working that out together. And it's just, I just don't want people to have this like idea that, oh, here, and here have to be met before you can do this. Right. Because those goals may never happen. Those aren't guaranteed goals. So that was my little rant that I wanted to put in there. But I've seen that in people's marriages. I've seen that in my own marriage. And most of the time when something gets screwed up or messed up, it's not because they got married young, or not because, the community around them didn't support. It was something of not submitting yourself to the biblical mandate of what marriage looks like. And that always puts a thing in it. So, we're coming up on about 15 minutes here. So let's go with ending thoughts. That'll be mine. Who wants to go first on their ending thoughts?
Matt, you want to go ahead, buddy?
Sure, yeah. So I don't know what the statistics are. And 75% of the statistics that you hear are made up anyways, just like that one was. So, um, but I would be interested in looking at some kind of a study, and I should have done this before, but now it kind of hit me at this point, to look at what the divorce rates are in direct proportion to the age ranges, and even also location, culture. It said look at a lot of different factors for that, but I can say that the primary factor in having a healthy, successful marriage is simply that you work at it.
Mm-hmm.
And there I would say you're just as likely to have a terrible or broken marriage, um, after waiting for the perfect opportunity, for the perfect situation, for the perfect age. It's just as likely as if you get married straight out the gate.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really what happens inside the marriage, that really dictates where it goes. Now, of course, you should not be like me. Do what I say, not as I do, and you should definitely submit yourself to good counsel, biblical wisdom. Uh, you know, don't don't get married to the daughter of a stripper, even though your parents beg you not to. So that's just just from personal experience, I can say don't do that. And I think that my other closing thought would just be that, biblically speaking, marriage definitely is a requirement for anyone who would hold the offices of bishop, or elder or deacon in the
Mhm.
church. And there is a lot to unpack there. One of which is, so where does it sounds sort of like a safety net. Because I even kind of deal with that and kind of think of that with myself as being 31 and single and in the ministry, not in any kind of like lead, uh, pastoral role or executive or administrative role, but just someone who is in the ministry. Because, like, if I were to flirt the wrong way, it could potentially be disastrous for me, for and even for my church, for in that case. So I think that's just one of the many reasons why I think that it's biblical wisdom that people in those kinds of church leadership position, um, have to be married to meet those qualifications.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I really like what you said there as far as like that you have to work at it. Like that's one of the things that I don't like all the time, especially when we sit down and do the marriage counseling for the younger couples. We're like, "Hey guys, you're gonna have a moment if you haven't had it yet where it's just gonna be like, oh, this is like the knockdown, drag out fight you got, and that's okay. You're gonna have that. You're gonna have to work at it. Because some people enter it, they're like they've had the little fight, and they have this fairy tale of what it is. But yeah, it is this constant going after the other person, working on it for sure. That people I don't think they don't realize that, and then they think that hit that bump, and that was it. Then that's the thing that's the over it. So no, that's a great point, Josh. What do you got?
I think so. I think that these days, and I say these days in terms of like the social media days that we exist in today, have somehow affected the initiation of relationships and dating detrimentally. Because I can't relate to it because I didn't have this when I dated at a younger age. But it seems like the young people that I know or am related to who are single and have issues with it, who struggle, they want to be married, they want to find someone and can't. They have a hard time even dating. It seems like dating might be at the root of some of this in terms of they're not getting, I can't get married because there's no one to date, because there's no one qualified. I'm not attracted to anybody. And so those are all things to be thought through and worked through. I think people do exist that you could date. Now, I might get hate for that because, again, there's probably someone out there who literally they're the only single person in their church or something, right? But there is a larger community out there in your country.
Me.
Yeah, there's some single people in your county, I think, buddy. Right? Um, so so for me, I think that's something that has to kind of be overcome first. Is this idea of how you approach dating? I know people that put way too much pressure on themselves and think that they have to marry the first person they date, or that after a single date, they have to be committed to something. I've always told people that there's no commitment in a single date, in the first date. Like, there's no commitment there. Go out and have a bunch of first dates and get to know some people. I know for me, growing up, when I was in youth group, I had lots of friends who were girls, and that regular interaction with the opposite sex was really, really good for me. I think it was good for them just in being able to relate to the other gender and having that be a normal occurrence, so that I wasn't the most super awkward Baptist at my college interacting with girls, right? Because we all know those people too who had never talked or spoken to a boy or a girl, and they just couldn't do it, and it lends itself to not progressing in that area. And I think a responsibility of churches is not to necessarily always separate boys and girls in youth group, but bring them together to learn to interact, to love each other as brothers and sisters in Christ. And that builds a foundation then to where you do know how to interact with somebody out on a date. You do know how to respect them. You know how to love them. And maybe that progresses into a relationship that's worthy of getting married. So I think there are a lot of root causes in terms of how the church has progressed over the years that do help affect this whole idea of getting married young is good or it's bad, or all sorts of those kinds of issues. But again, there's so many moving pieces. It's hard to nail it down to one or the other. The last thing I would say is, at least for the guys, and I would only say this to guys, I think that most guys' standards of beauty are too perfect. I think guys have too much of a standard in terms of what they think they want. And somehow I've heard an excuse from multiple people that, well, if I marry someone I'm not 100% attracted to them, I might stumble. I might cheat on them. I might struggle with pornography or something. Well, guess what? She's going to get old. They all do. We all do. Right? She's not.
Well, your wife's apparently geriatric, according to the paperwork. So.
Oh, yeah. No, I hope she never watches this. I'm going to be in trouble. Right. But the point is, like, don't have these Hollywood standards. It's not real. None of that's real, And what I have found is the older I've gotten, the more I look at the younger generation. It's like, what? All these young ladies are pretty. In one way or another, they all have an aura about them that's attractive and nice and wonderful. And why wouldn't anyone date this young lady? Why are all these young ladies single? Now, maybe that's me being an old man because I just don't get it, right? But I think that I wouldn't have said that 20 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would have had some standard of beauty or hotness or whatever that was untenable. And I think that's something that guys have to get over. And the older I get and the more mature I get, the more I see how ridiculous that is. Because as my wife and I have grown, and I got old and fat, and but we love each other. Right? Like, we've grown together, like those trees you talked about, where we're stronger together, and that kind of falls by the wayside. It's not quite as important. And so I would encourage guys to not have some overwhelming perfectionist standard of beauty that's preventing you from dating somebody, because there are a lot of girls out there who are absolutely wonderful. I had a buddy of mine, I think he said, I'm paraphrasing, this was years ago, when I got engaged, and he basically said, guys just want what we really want is just somebody to love you. At the end of the day, having someone that loves you, that you can come home to, that's the best thing in the world. Right? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, at that point, who cares what they look like? Like, they love you for you. So I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling now, but I think that for guys that perfectionist standard of beauty is killing them, and they have to get over that.
Yeah. Well, and I said that was my ending statement, but now I'm going to piggyback on both of yours and do an ending statement altogether. But I think
your show,
so one, I think that one, if it's your ability to get married young, like if you are dating currently and you are in that age bracket of whatever, go to 18 to 24 or whatever, and you have the ability to do that, I think you do have to ask yourself, why am I not? Like, what am I waiting for that's going to be perfect, that's going to make this all right? Because I can assure you, there's not going to be some magical moment that makes it right. And if you think that was the magical moment, I can guarantee you later on when you look back, that's not the magical moment you thought it was. So, like, I'd say if you're in that age range and you have good counsel and people are saying, yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. I mean, if their excuse for not doing it is your job or your age or something like that, I think that there's some reasonable pushback you can give there, because that. Again, you're going to be broke when you're 40 probably too, just not as broke as you were when you were 20. So that money thing I think is a ridiculous, nonsensical thing to work toward. And secondly, even if you're later in life, right? So even if you're out of the young category and you're getting married, there is still going to be this, when you pursue someone else, if again, I say this, and I understand I say this from some random mountain, and I'm talking to people that I don't know their experience, so I get that. But I think if you don't pursue that because of, again, like some beauty standard or some I'm still waiting for this to happen or I got hurt before, I think there's a point there where you have to kind of break past that a bit and go into just a situation like, Lord, whatever you have for me, I'm good for it. And I'm going to keep working on pursuing you in this and just hoping something comes along in that process. Because again, marriage isn't the goal, but if it happens, there's a lot of sanctification to be had in that. There's a lot of growth to be had in that. And there's a lot to be had in dating. So one of the things, I guess, to kind of close on this, one, the whole age thing people had a huge issue about. Like, if you're already past that, I get that it's harder. I think Matt spoke to that a little bit, that it's harder. I think we've all spoke to the fact, and I could get DM upon DM about, hey, I'm the only person in my church. I literally get that DM all the time. I'm the only person in my church. Everyone else is married or everyone else is too young. Like, that is a copy paste DM all the time. And I'd say in that, like, okay, well, like, that can't be the excuse. Like, if your desire is to get married, then like, we have to look outside. And I get, apparently there's somebody in a group chat we're in that's like, all I get when I'm on, Christian dating apps is creepy Christian guys. So, I mean, there's the thing where, you have to work through all of that mess and pursue is all I'm saying. Because when you're in a relationship, you're still going to be pursuing. It's the same thing in a different way. And, again, I guess that's all I'm saying there. If you have the ability to get married young, do that, because there is so much benefit in that if you both submit to God's outline and standard within Scripture about how you act toward one another, how you grow with one another, how you really are discipling one another and sanctifying one another, even though you don't know that's happening. And then if you're past that stage, which I know a lot of people that sit DMs are, what I would say is, okay, you're past the stage. There's nothing you can do to go back in time, but there is something you could do. I mean, there's a lot of people like, I can't find anybody. I can't find anybody either. So you're both out there. Like, I don't know if maybe the Honest Youth Pastor needs to do some sort of dating site or something, but there's clearly people out there looking. So you're gonna have to pursue that if at all possible. And I don't have any, unfortunately, like, reasonable ways for you to do that. I understand I'm talking against a wall here on that part, but don't. If you desire that, don't give up on that, I guess is all I'm saying. I think it's of a benefit, and everything else on that list that is in the tweet, I think, is good things to do to prepare yourself for when somebody does come along. If you're active, if you're reliable, if you're evangelizing, if you know Scripture, as a Christian single, you're a pretty high value asset, essentially. Because, I mean, this is what, all the time women say, I can't find a biblical man. Guys say, I can't find a biblical girl. Well, if you do these things, that's the kind of people that they're apparently, from what I understand, they're looking for. So Anyway, I'm talking into the ground here now, but hopefully, guys, if you saw that tweet, if you saw that in the stories, you had the questions about it. I hope we've touched on some of that tonight. I know there's a lot left out. I'm sure that there were questions that were a lot left out that you may have. But that being said, I trust that some of this was beneficial for you. So if it was, make sure you like it, make sure you subscribe, make sure you comment, all the cool things. And then next week come back because we'll be doing another one of these on who knows, maybe I'll say something stupid or somebody else will say something stupid, and we'll talk about that next week. So guys, we'll see you next Tuesday night, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll talk to you later. See ya.
Have a good night.